Welcome back. The criminal trial of former President Trump will resume on Tuesday with closing arguments. There have also been some developments in the classified documents case. So let's break this all down. We have prosecutor and host of Today with Dr. Wendy on KCBQ Radio, Wendy Patrick, and Rae Chornenky is a constitutional attorney and a former U.S. attorney as well. Lots to talk about. Let's start with jury instructions. That's going to be coming here this week, I should say. Tuesday, we'll have closing arguments. Wednesday, jury could get these instructions. Wendy, what are you expecting? Judge Juan Merchan's got to give these jury instructions here. They were debating about those last week. Are you going to see any? Can we expect maybe some bias here as to what they have to deliberate over?
That depends on who you ask, doesn't it? Because think about the enormity of this task, the jury instructions, and deciding whether or not those jurors get to choose which other crime the former president allegedly falsified business records to prevent. Remember, this case is about a crime and a cover-up. Prosecutor said that in the opening statement. So now, having come full circle, what does it mean in terms of how the jurors can weigh the evidence that they've heard over the last 5 weeks, given the charge he's going to give them on Tuesday? This is of particular significance because this is the first of its kind in terms of this law being used this way and against this kind of a defendant, a former president of the United States, and potentially the next one.
Yeah.
So I can imagine the judge has not had a bit of rest this weekend. I hope that he is working through these instructions to make sure the jurors get what's fair.
Raylene, have you ever seen anything like this before where the jury can pick the crime?
No, definitely not. I think the issue that is going to be, biggest for them is the issue of reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, with the evidence that hasn't been presented or the arguments that have to be made. I think that's going to be the most important or difficult issue for the jury.
It's incredible to me because this all seems to hinge, Wendy, on the word of Michael Cohen. Because we couldn't hear from a Federal Elections Commission former chairman who might be able to tell you what is a campaign contribution violation.
That's right. And that's a big problem because that's one of the things that Judge Merchan is grappling with, no doubt, over the weekend is how can he, if he can narrow it down, phrase the end goal? What was the end goal here? However, let me put on my other hat and say, it doesn't matter whether or not Michael Cohen, at least to some extent, told a bunch of lies because he's not the only witness. He is of enormous consequence to the prosecutor. But remember, corroboration equals credibility. The problem they're going to have is in the aggregate. The avalanche of admitted dishonesty incidents is just overwhelming. And even though his testimony is to some extent corroborated by paperwork, by other witnesses like Hope Hicks, it still comes down to this guy to connect the dots. Remember, his last book was called Revenge, so motive matters to those jurors as well, and that'll be something they'll be allowed to consider. So although he was a big part of the testimony, they will have some other things, but I still don't know whether it's enough to get the prosecution team over the finish line.
Well, and the other thing, too, is Michael Cohen was stealing from the Trump organization as he was being repaid back by the former president. That point, I think, needs to be very highlighted. Raylene, what are you expecting, though? How long do you think the jury will deliberate? We do know that there are 2 lawyers on that jury. Now, sometimes that helps or hurts your case, but what are you expecting? Do you think it's going to be a quick verdict?
Quick in terms of perhaps 2 to 3 days. I don't see a great deal of evidence that they're going to have to very carefully go through, as in a scientific issue in a homicide case, for example. So I think it will be, in terms of days, quicker as a verdict, but there's always that possibility of the holdout that may take longer for everybody to get in their own position and decide, can they make a decision unanimously or not?
Yeah, it's a good point. I had a look at this jury when I was in the courtroom, and it's hard to determine what they'll go. I know it's could go New York and typical voters here, but who knows? I mean, there's been a lot of testimony here that's been inconsistent. But Wendy, let's pivot here to the classified documents case. Special Counsel Jack Smith made this extraordinary step of seeking an order preventing Trump from making any statements that might pose a risk to law enforcement. Does this sound like a gag order to you?
Well, remember that it's different when you have some allegation that there's a public safety issue or that there's something that he may say that may compromise the integrity of the witnesses, the evidence, and the way it comes out in front of the jury. Now, Judge Cannon already has slated a number of motions she's going to rule on at the end of June. She's simply going to add this to the mix. It's different than the gag order that Judge Merchan imposed in this Manhattan case, but it's also true that there have been some instances that Jack Smith is citing where, in fact, Trump fans targeted certain people because of what he said on the news media. Those are just the different things she's going to have to weigh. But also remember, there is this right of free speech she's going to have to factor into the mix regarding what he can say about the process.
Raylin, what are you expecting from this? Do you think that Trump is going to fight this and say, you know, we've seen what he's been doing here in New York at this case. What are you expecting from the defense?
I am expecting that there'll be some sort of fight, some sort of standing up against any gag order type orders from the court. However, we have to remember that if this government does show some sort of threat of injury or harm, that this type of order might be perfect to be put in place.
All right. Well, we'll wait to see. Looking forward to closing arguments on Tuesday. I'm sure you are too as well, watching this case so closely. Wendy, Raylin, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.